The bustling airport gate buzzed with the usual symphony of boarding announcements and chattering passengers. Among the crowd stood Chief Angela Daniels, dressed casually in jeans and a crisp white blouse, blending in as just another traveler. Few would guess that she was one of the most respected and formidable police chiefs in the country. Angela carried herself with calm composure, her badge tucked away, out of sight. She preferred anonymity on her rare days off. As she approached the gate to board her flight, a commotion near the front of the line caught her attention. A loud, commanding voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me, ma'am," barked a uniformed pilot, her tone sharp and condescending. "You're holding everyone up." Angela turned, puzzled, and realized the pilot was speaking to her. She smiled politely. "I'm not sure what you mean. I've already scanned my boarding pass." The woman in the pilot's uniform stepped closer, her expression hardened by a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her name tag read Captain Walters. She was middle-aged, with neatly styled hair and a demeanor dripping with arrogance. "You're my way," Walters snapped, pointing toward the gate. "People like you should know better than to hold up the process." Angela's brow furrowed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I have a ticket like everyone else." The passengers around them began to take notice, whispers rippling through the crowd. Walters leaned in, lowering her voice but not the intensity. "Don't play dumb," she hissed. "I don't have time for this nonsense." Before Angela could respond, Walters did something that shocked everyone present. Without warning, she raised her hand and slapped Angela across the face. The sound echoed in the stunned silence that followed. Gasps erupted from the crowd, passengers frozen in disbelief. Angela staggered slightly, but quickly regained her footing, her hand instinctively rising to her cheek. Her expression was unreadable, her composure intact. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled, deadly. Walters scoffed, clearly unbothered by the reaction around her. "Move aside," she ordered, turning her back on Angela as though the matter was settled. Angela stood there for a moment, her gaze never leaving Walters. Then she pulled out her phone, typed a quick message, and slipped it back in her pocket. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. Instead, she took her place quietly among the boarding passengers. Little did Walters know, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The slap hadn't just stunned Angela. It had left the entire boarding area frozen in disbelief. People exchanged uncertain glances, whispers bubbling just beneath the surface. Captain Walters walked away as if nothing had happened, her arrogance unshaken, issuing curt commands to the staff while passengers hesitantly proceeded to board. Angela, however, remained calm, her expression unreadable as she joined the line and headed toward the plane. Settling into her business class seat, she reached for her phone, intending to document the events while they were fresh in her mind. But as she rifled through her bag, an unsettling realization struck. Her phone wasn't there. Angela blinked in confusion, her fingers searching the same compartment over and over. She checked her jacket pocket, then her carry-on luggage. Her phone was gone. A flash of irritation crossed her face, quickly replaced by calculated focus. She retraced her steps in her mind. Where could she have left it? Who could have taken it? Across the cabin, a passenger hunched over his own phone, frantically swiping and typing, completely engrossed. His screen glowed with snippets of video, grainy, barely audible footage of the incident at the boarding gate. He chuckled to himself, editing the clip, adding captions like, "Rude captain puts passenger in place." His only thought was how many clicks and shares this post might earn him. Little did he realize the storm he was about to unleash. As the plane began taxiing down the runway, Angela's unease grew. It wasn't just about the missing phone, it was the unsettling feeling that someone else had already capitalized on the situation. She stole a glance at the passengers around her, scanning faces for anything unusual, but each one seemed preoccupied, on their phones, flipping through magazines, or chatting quietly with their companions. And then there was Walters, up in the cockpit, her commanding voice occasionally crackling over the intercom. Angela stared ahead, the quiet hum of the plane, unable to drown out the questions swirling in her mind. She couldn't place how or when her phone had disappeared. But one thing was clear. Someone else now held the key to the evidence she needed. Mid-flight, a soft ping echoed across the cabin. Passengers began scrolling through their phones. Some gasped. Others murmured, as a viral post popped up on their screens, a video of the slap, accompanied by a clickbait caption, *outrage at airport. Pilot confronts passenger. Angela heard the whispers, though she couldn't see the video herself. The footage, edited to sensationalize the encounter, painted Walters as the victim and Angela as the aggressor. It spread like wildfire, the narrative twisting further with every share. The passenger who had uploaded the clip smiled smugly at the traction it was gaining, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Angela sat quietly, her jaw tight as fragments of conversations floated around her. She couldn't predict how bad this might get, but one thing was certain: someone was about to regret underestimating her. The plane touched down at the small regional airport, shrouded in a misty veil of clouds. The unexpected diversion due to bad weather left passengers restless and the crew scrambling to adjust. Angela waited patiently in her seat, but her thoughts were racing. Her missing phone had been gnawing at her. She decided it was time to act. After the plane was parked and passengers were asked to remain seated, Angela rose and approached the nearest flight attendant. The young woman appeared flustered but managed a polite smile. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," she said softly. "I need to report a missing item," Angela replied, her tone calm but firm. "It's my phone, and I believe it might have been taken during the flight." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing nervously toward the front of the cabin. I can take you to the person in charge," she stammered, motioning for Angela to follow her. Angela was led through the narrow aisle to the front of the plane, where Captain Walters was waiting in the galley. Her posture radiated impatience, her arms crossed tightly over her uniform. The flight attendant spoke up hesitantly. "Captain Walters, this passenger, she's reporting a missing phone." Walters' eyes narrowed as she looked Angela up and down, her expression souring further. "You again," Walters spat, the venom in her voice unmistakable. "Haven't you caused enough trouble already?" Angela didn't flinch. "I'm simply reporting a missing phone, Captain," she said evenly. "It's my right as a passenger." Walters stepped closer, her voice lowering but dripping with hostility. "You're accusing my crew now? Are you insinuating that one of us stole your precious phone?" Angela's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "I didn't accuse anyone. I'm only asking for assistance in locating it." Passengers seated near the front turned their heads to watch the exchange, their curiosity piqued. Walter's voice, though lowered, carried a sharp edge that cut through the murmur of the cabin. "This is exactly the kind of disruption I was expecting from someone like you," Walters hissed. "You've been nothing but a nuisance since the gate." Angela raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unwavering. "With all due respect, Captain, I believe this conversation could be handled more professionally." Walter's face reddened, her composure slipping as she barked. "Enough. Sit down and stop wasting my time, or I'll have you removed from this flight." Angela didn't respond. She knew anything she said would only escalate the situation. Instead, she turned and walked back to her seat, the weight of every passenger's gaze following her. The tension in the cabin was almost unbearable, whispers spreading like wildfire. From across the aisle, a man with a smartphone watched the entire exchange with a sly grin. He had been recording the confrontation, already envisioning the virality of his video. The caption practically wrote itself. Entitled passenger versus heroic pilot. He chuckled to himself, utterly unaware of the storm his actions might unleash. Back in her seat, Angela stared out of the window, her mind racing. She felt the sting of Walter's words, the weight of the passenger's judgment, and the absence of her phone all pressing down on her. But she stayed calm. She knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As the plane cruised through the skies, Captain Walters sat in the cockpit, her face twisted in a self-satisfied smirk. She couldn't stop thinking about Angela. Reporting a missing phone? It felt like a personal slight, an indirect accusation of her or her crew. Walters wouldn't let it go unanswered. Gripping her phone during a momentary break, she typed a message to her sister, a police sergeant in the destination state. "Got a problem passenger on board," Walters wrote. "Causing trouble, making baseless accusations. I want her dealt with. Can you send a couple of officers to the terminal when we land?" The reply came quickly, "Consider it done." Meanwhile, Detective Matthews was on high alert. He had been tracking the viral videos of Angela since the incident at the gate, his concern growing with every passing hour. He tried calling her repeatedly, but her line was dead. The last thing Matthews wanted was to jump to conclusions, but the timing of her disappearance and the content of those videos made one thing clear. Angela was being targeted. Matthews acted swiftly. Using the flight information pulled from the background of the viral clip, he confirmed the airline and its scheduled destination. "Get a team to the airport," he ordered his officers. "I don't care what it takes. She'll need backup, and we need to be there when they land." Keeping his plans quiet, Matthews dispatched multiple officers to the airport ahead of the flight's arrival. He didn't know exactly what he'd be walking into, but he knew Angela well enough to trust that she wasn't causing trouble. She was enduring it. As the plane began its descent, Angela stayed calm in her seat, despite the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. She hadn't missed the pilot's smug glances earlier, nor the whispers spreading among passengers, fueled by the viral videos. She could sense it, the tension, the hostility, the judgment, but she chose to remain silent. When the plane landed and came to a halt at the gate, passengers began filing off, one by one. Angela waited, deliberately staying toward the back of the line. She preferred not to rush. The eyes on her already felt suffocating enough. At the terminal exit, 2 uniformed officers stood waiting, their postures rigid as they scanned the faces of disembarking passengers. Walters watched from the cockpit door, a smirk tugging at her lips as Angela approached. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, stepping forward. Angela paused, meeting their gaze evenly. "I'd like to know the reason for this," she said calmly. "You're being arrested for causing a disturbance aboard this flight," the officer replied, his tone blunt. Angela's expression didn't shift, but her voice took on an edge. "Is this your decision, or did someone instruct you?" The officers exchanged brief glances before the second one spoke up. "You can address that later. For now, please comply." Angela didn't resist as the cuffs were placed around her wrists, her poise unbroken despite the humiliation. Behind her, Walters stepped into the terminal, her smugness on full display as she watched the scene unfold. As the officers escorted Angela toward the exit, Walters thought she had won. But what she hadn't noticed was the group of officers positioned near the main terminal entrance, scanning the crowd. Detective Matthews stood among them, his sharp eyes landing on the cuffs encircling Angela's wrists. "That's Chief Daniels," Matthews said firmly to his team. "Let's move." Captain Walters' smug expression froze as Detective Matthews and his team strode purposefully toward the scene. Walters tried to maintain her composure, but there was no mistaking the shift in atmosphere. The officers with Angela immediately hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces as Matthews approached with a commanding presence. "Excuse me," Matthews said, his voice calm but steely. "I believe there's been a mistake here." The officer holding Angela's arm frowned. She was causing a disturbance on the flight. "We were instructed to take her into custody." "By whom?" Matthews asked sharply, his eyes narrowing. The officer faltered, glancing toward Walters, who stood a few feet away, her face pale now, but still trying to project confidence. Matthews turned to Angela, his expression softening for just a moment. "Chief, are you all right?" Angela, still calm despite the cuffs around her wrists, nodded. "I'm fine," she said simply, "but I think Captain Walters has some explaining to do." Walters took a step forward, her voice rising defensively. "This passenger was disruptive and accused my crew of theft. I had every right to ensure she faced consequences." Matthews raised an eyebrow, his tone turning cold. "You had no right to humiliate and assault her, Captain." We've seen the footage from the gate incident, and it's very clear who was out of line." The mention of the footage made Walter's composure crumble just a little. "Footage," she echoed, her voice faltering. "Yes," Matthews said, holding up his phone and tapping the screen. The video played loud enough for those nearby to hear. The slap, the gasps, Angela's composed response. Several passengers who had been lingering nearby started murmuring, some recording the unfolding confrontation. Walter's confidence shattered further as the truth began sinking in. Matthews gestured toward Angela's cuffs. "Remove those immediately," he ordered the arresting officers, who didn't hesitate to comply. Angela rubbed her wrists slightly as the cuffs were taken off, but her expression remained poised. She turned to Walters, her voice calm but cutting. "You thought you could humiliate me and get away with it. You thought wrong." Before Walters could respond, another officer from Matthews' team stepped forward, holding out a phone. "Sir, you'll want to see this," he said, handing it over. Matthews glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Angela asked, her eyes narrowing. Matthews sighed, handing the phone to her. It was another video, this time from inside the plane. Passengers had continued to record Walter's outburst during the flight, her open hostility toward Angela. The comments flooding the video were scathing, condemning Walter's behavior and calling for accountability. Angela handed the phone back, her gaze locking onto Walter's. "You've not only humiliated yourself, but you've implicated your crew and your airline in this mess. I hope you're ready for the consequences." Walters opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The weight of what she'd done, combined with the growing crowd of onlookers recording every moment, left her speechless. The terminal was chaos. Passengers crowded around, cameras rolling as Angela's cuffs were removed by Detective Matthews' orders. Captain Walters was sputtering defensively, her confidence cracking under the weight of the evidence against her. Angela, who had remained calm through every humiliation so far, turned to face Walters. "You wanted me in cuffs," Angela said, her voice steady but ice-cold. "You humiliated me, insulted me, assaulted me, and abused your power to cover your tracks. I hope you're ready for what comes next." Before Walters could formulate a response, Angela took a single, deliberate step forward and slapped her. Hard. The sharp sound echoed through the terminal, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. Walters staggered slightly, her hand flying to her cheek. But Angela wasn't done. She delivered a second slap, just as firm as the first, ensuring that Walters and everyone watching knew that justice wasn't just coming. It was already here. That, Angela said firmly, was for thinking I was powerless. Walters stared in disbelief, too stunned to speak. Just as Angela turned back toward Matthews, a loud, piercing alarm rang out, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Heads swiveled as passengers tried to locate the source of the sound. Angela's expression shifted slightly. She recognized that alarm. It was hers. It was her phone. The sound was coming from a man standing in the crowd, his phone in hand, recording the entire scene. He froze as all eyes locked on him. The alarm continued to blare from his pocket, revealing the phone he had stolen. The very phone Angela had reported missing. Angela stepped toward him, her presence commanding. "Funny," she said, her voice calm yet razor-sharp. "That's my phone. Care to explain how you got it?" The man stammered, trying to shove the phone deeper into his pocket, but the officers flanking Angela moved quickly. Within seconds, the phone was retrieved, the evidence undeniable. As Angela powered it back on, she scrolled through his recording app. Multiple clips of her were there, including the initial altercation at the gate. "You've been busy," Angela said, glaring at him. "You didn't just steal my phone. You recorded my humiliation and spread it online. All to make a quick buck, didn't you?" The man looked around, realizing there was no escape. Officers took him into custody, the crowd murmuring in approval. Detective Matthews didn't waste time, turning back to the officers who had originally arrested Angela. "Now, as for you two," he said, his voice cutting like steel, "you acted without verifying your orders. You didn't investigate the claims you were given, and you allowed yourselves to be used as tools for someone else's vendetta. The officers shifted uncomfortably, but didn't argue. Matthews motioned to his team. Take them into custody for procedural misconduct. They'll face internal review. Angela crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering as the officers who had wrongfully arrested her were escorted away. She turned to Matthews. And what about Walters? Matthews nodded, gesturing to the defeated captain, who now looked more like a cornered animal than the smug figure she had been. Captain Walters, you're under arrest for assault, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice. He signaled for his team, and Walters was promptly handcuffed and led away, her protest drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. As the chaos began to settle, Angela stood tall, finally free to address the gathered onlookers. Let this be a lesson, she said, her voice carrying authority and strength. No matter how high you think you stand, no one is above accountability. Abuse of power ends where people like me stand up and say enough. The crowd erupted in applause, passengers cheering her resilience and composure. In the background, Walters was led out of the terminal, her head hanging low as her career unraveled before her eyes. Angela turned to Matthews, allowing a small smile to cross her lips. Thank you, she said simply. I couldn't have done it without you. Matthews chuckled. You didn't need me, Chief. You had this under control the entire time. Angela raised an eyebrow. Maybe, but it's nice to know I've got a team that's got my back.